the way they make him seem like a man with a beard in heaven on a cloud throwing down thunderbolts?
No, not really. I mean, it's more that I just don't really put much thought into whether or not the actual literal claims of the Bible or whatever is true. I think it's much more interesting what impact it has on our culture.
Okay. Do you think the impact's good? Do you think it's bad?
I think that's a bit like saying, like, is the weather good or bad? It's
nice.
It's so influential
Wow.
that you can't even comprehend a world without it. We wouldn't be the same nation without our Christian inheritance, and more recently the inheritance of other religions that have come through immigration. And I think that's just like, I mean, you can find things to celebrate about it, but at the same time, it's just something that's ultimately caused the way we are today. And I don't think there's much more you can really do other than try and appreciate its influence and understand it.
Yeah, definitely. You're onto something very fascinating that I think a lot of people sidestep, which is morality. Somebody without morality, naturally, they will. They say subjective morality, isn't it? Whatever you think is good, that's good. But you're saying that it is definitely rooted in Christianity. Well, I would even say the Abrahamic faiths. Abrahamic faiths.
I mean, I think we assume that it's universal to have a value system based on the assumption that all people have equal moral worth, and that it's better to be humble than it is to be selfish. The reality is, like, if you go back to pre-Christian times, Roman times, that wasn't their morality system. Their morality system was based on strength, and the strong deserve to succeed and the weak deserve to suffer. And that's not how we think anymore. Because Christianity sort of flipped that, or the Abrahamic religion flipped that, and that's the cultural inheritance we have now. And I think it's very easy to assume that those values we have been held by all people in all times and all places, and that's just not true. They're very culturally contingent. The culture that makes them contingent is our Christian one, or I should say Abrahamic cultures.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, what's your name?
John.
John, nice to meet you, John.
Nice to meet you.
So I think conversation like this and appreciation with regards to kind of morals and stuff like that is so important, because like we've agreed, it's, when you move away from morals, it leads to subjectivism, and subjectivism eventually leads to individualism, and individualism is linked inextricably to materialism, which is, how would you say, it might be a bit of a tangent, but how would you define happiness?
It's such a tricky one, and I think it's, again, very culturally contingent. But I mean, I think you can only really give a personal perspective.
Of course.
Mine probably is that it's about being content and happy and content with what you've got.
Contentment.
Contentment, I guess.
That's a brilliant answer. I love that.
But I mean, I think it's human nature to never achieve that. And that's why we need things like this.
That's why even in the American Constitution, I think they say the pursuit of happiness.
Exactly.
Because it's a never-ending pursuit, I guess.
Exactly.
So, you said John, yeah?
Yeah.
So, John, what have you heard about the Islamic perspective of God? Because you're probably familiar with the Christian perspective, which is the Trinity.
I don't know very much about Islamic theology.
So, the four-pronged approach of us defining a God is, say he is God the One.
Yeah.
It's like one, not two, not three, not a multiplicity. He's independent.
Yeah.
He does not beget, nor is he begotten.
Yeah.
And there's none like him. How does that definition of God sound to you rationally and logically?
I mean, it's coming from a place of relative ignorance, and certainly not like someone who's been to church that much or very much like Christianity, I'd say it sounds quite similar to the Christian conception of God. It's about monism rather than pluralism about the nature of God.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably going to be, rolling around in the park, no pun intended, but you'll probably hear that the Christian belief that's most common nowadays is the Trinity. Of course, I'm going to let them explain to you in depth, but they believe that there's a Father, there's a Son, there's a Holy Spirit. There are three divine beings, but they are one. So when Jesus came, he ate and he drank, but he was God. The Islamic belief with regards to this is no, there is only one God. He is unlike we can imagine. He's not like human. He doesn't eat, doesn't drink, he doesn't sleep. He is powerful, he sees, he hears, unlike human beings, of course. And even because we were talking about morality as well, there's 5 things, and let me know what you think about this. It might, I think you're right, it may align with the Christian values as well, it probably does. Like Islam came to preserve 5 things. One is, of course, religion, which I defined as monotheism, pure monotheism. The other is life, i.e. taking of life is bad, not killing people unjustly and wrongly, preserving the intellect. And anything that kind of goes, because today people struggle to justify why alcohol and drugs would be wrong. You'll see there's one individual roaming around with like a bottle of scotch in his hand, pissed out of his skull. But I mean, nobody would go to him and aim to kind of morally justify that, look after yourself, mate. This isn't right. So intellect, because naturally, I'm sure you'll agree that if a person's pissed out of their skull, they find it very difficult to problem solve effectively. That's why they say don't drink and drive. So Islam came to preserve intellect as well. Family, obviously family values, you're seeing the breakdown of family values due to heavily promotion by the left. Some people may call them the left, wokeism, LGBT, whatever you want to call it. And of course wealth, like in Islam, dealing with interest is forbidden, unnecessarily, of course. So because the interest makes the rich richer and the poor poorer, and we hear this about Jesus as well. But unfortunately nowadays the banking system relies on interest. So as like an objective or a goal, these 5 things, they align with.
Yeah, I think broadly it makes sense as a value system. I think that ultimately the things that we think and the way we view the world is so influenced by our upbringing and the culture we exist in that, I think if I'd been born into an Islamic family, I'm sure I would believe that, in the same way that, as I say, born into a sort of culturally Christian family, we don't go to church, but as I said before, we're hugely, without realising it, influenced by Christian assumptions about morality, then I think that is basically the causal impact of the background. And I think, as I say, that makes sense as a value system in the same way that liberal secularism makes sense as a value system. I suppose some of them realise different goods than others. You mentioned like family and abstinence, and I'd say probably you're more likely to have that in an Islamic value system with the gain of some goods and the loss of some goods, and in a liberal secular society maybe there is less of a family emphasis in terms of the nuclear family, and that comes with positives in terms of individual freedom but negatives in terms of social cohesion. I think basically in every value system there's going to be some good and some bad that you realise, and there's no such thing in my view as one value system that perfectly encapsulates all the goods that exist in the universe in terms of the moral goods. So it's just a case of having a sort of coherent set of values that is rooted in some sort of cultural context for you, but also is sort of freely chosen by you.
You know what's interesting? I was having a conversation with somebody else as well, and they were also saying something similar, that the why is not important. It's the how that's important. But then what's interesting is, let's just say we're here in the park, somebody puts a bag over your head and then puts you on a train, and then when they take the bag off, there's one of those guys with the 3-piece suit with those silver trays. He comes and presents you something. He's like, which of these would you like? You wouldn't care about his French accent. You wouldn't start saying, what's for starters? You say, where am I going? Where am I going? Let's deal with that first. No, but just don't worry, we were looking after you. We're doing this. So what's interesting, John, is that I guess because of the infighting that some people assume of religions, they think because there's many options, therefore just put them all to the side and take something that's common. But it's like somebody saying 1 + 1 is 2, 1 + 1 is 3, 1 + 1 is a potato, 1 + 1 is a microphone. A person would definitely go out of their way to say, you know what, there's 4 options. Let me see which of these options logically, rationally, empirically makes the most sense. So John, I guess what I'm trying to say is, although there may be different options, there may be certain correlations, there are certain kind of things that, for example, somebody comes along and says, look, this is the holy book. You take this holy book, and for example, let me ask you, if somebody says that this is the book from God, what criteria would you have to accept that this book needs to be from God? Personally, of course.
I don't think there are any sort of rational criteria on which you'd accept that. I think in the end, we use reason to justify what we already believe rather than to make our decisions. I think that whether or not you view a holy book as the truth completely depends on the society you've been brought up in and the values, the beliefs that you've inherited from your parents, your wider friendship group, your community. And I don't think those are rationally chosen. I think they are completely contingent on
That's interesting.
factors.
Because in philosophy there's three schools of thought. One is the deterministic school of thought. That you've heard of that, yeah? Yeah. So you're going more with determinism?
I just think that if I was born in China in the 15th century, I wouldn't believe what I believe now. I believe what a Chinese person believes in the 15th century. If I was born in Britain 1,000 years ago, I would have completely different beliefs than I have today. And it works in terms of culture as well, in the modern day. I think in the end, you can't really choose your culture. You're born into it and you inherit those values. And I think those values translate into your beliefs about what's true, what's empirical reality, such as the truth or not of any sort of holy book or scriptures or indeed scientific facts claimed by rational secular organisations.
Well, what's interesting is, if that was the case, because I'm trying to follow along with what you're saying, it's a good point, but if that was the case, then we would see, because this is supposedly a Christian country, but it's becoming more secular liberal now, we would see these two theologies or philosophies grow exponentially. We wouldn't see reversions into other religions, but if you see statistically here in the UK, the fastest growing religion here in the UK and in fact the West is Islam. And in fact, when you see people like, even Isaac Newton, he was a Christian, even though he formulated gravity. The first person that came up with the Big Bang, George's, I think is Lamarck or something along those lines. Even Friedrich Nietzsche, he was born a Christian. Charles Darwin was born a Christian, but both of them, Richard Dawkins was born a Christian, Charles Darwin born a Christian, but Charles Darwin didn't leave religion, he became agnostic. But the thing is that, John, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the reasoning and the faculties, when we, I think, go beyond puberty and when we start kind of interacting more with people, that's why they say traveling broadens the mind. So the more you kind of hear different perspectives and different people, the more you then start questioning what you believe in yourself. Let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. Tell me if there's something that you agree with or disagree with. One of the criteria I would have for a religious scripture is, let's just say the Bible gets put forward, the Quran gets put forward, and the Vedas of the Hindus gets put forward. And all three are claiming that, look, this is from God. I would say firstly that, is this the same book? Because of course the religion is, the book was claimed to have been revealed thousands of years ago. So I would say, is this the same book that was there at that time? And can I measure it myself? Because frankly, I don't trust the people that are telling me that this is the book from God. So preservation, in other words, is that reasonable criteria for you?
I think it is reasonable, but I think that's always going to be in the end like an act of faith rather than an act of reason. I don't mean faith in the religious sense. I mean based on trust.
Okay. Let me know what you think about this. So, as Muslims, we claim that our book 1400 years ago has been unchanged. And the criteria, and you're more than welcome to, as you can see, I'm not, enforcing anything upon you. You can just cycle away whenever you choose. So if you think that it's unfair, what I'm saying, or it's illogical, just jump in and say, I disagree with that, and I'll be okay with that. So with the Quran, what I'm saying is, our preservation can be proved objectively. For example, the Bible, when it was claimed to be revealed, it was a bookish religion. It was written down, and naturally, if, for example, the first book that's written down gets passed on to somebody else, the only way you can get a copy of that is by copying it. And when you copy things, sometimes you get tired, sometimes you make a mistake, and you copy the errors. Then somebody copies off you, they copy the errors. So you might be thinking, how is the Quran different? When the Quran was revealed, it was memorized, verbatim. And it was passed on from heart to heart. So the Quran itself primarily was memorized, but also written down. So it was both corroborated. Even today, you will see, John, children as young as 6 that have memorized the Quran cover to cover. So if, for example, I was to read the Quran here and I was to make a mistake, people here would be able to correct me. Why? Because they have memorized it. So that's number one, how the Quran has been preserved. And number two, I'm sure you'd agree, it's language. Like Jesus spoke Aramaic. Aramaic is not a live language. The Vedas were revealed in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is not a live language. The Quran is revealed in Arabic. Lo and behold, Arabic is one of the top 5 spoken languages in the world. So it's a live language that somebody could learn it and have access to the primary scripture. However, with even the Old Testament Hebrew, it's not a live language. You have to go into Hebrew studies, Greek studies, Aramaic studies, and then you have to kind of decipher, and it's exclusive. However, with Arabic, you can go to your, download an app and you can start learning Arabic. But it's not something that's accessible. And the third thing I would say to maybe somebody that was more inclined towards science, you might say, because that was a good point, the fact that you said about belief, that empirical studies or empiricism in science, in order to test the historical veracity of something, there's something called carbon dating. Say they carbon date this to that particular time. So they found 4 folios of the Quran, and this is actually preserved in the University of Birmingham, in this country. Not in an Islamic country where Muslims can have their way with it, but in a non-Muslim country, and it was carbon dated to the time of revelation. Now, having a manuscript that's dated and the word accuracy of the Quran that we have today, it's 100% word accuracy. However, you can't say that with the Bible, you can't say that with the Old Testament, you can't say that with the Vedas. So these are the 3 things. Again, it's an accumulation of evidence, John, that a person goes, okay, what's your evidence? Okay, what's your evidence? Like, for example, when I go Superdrug, I look at shampoo. Yeah, everyone says they're anti-dandruff, but then which of it has, the properties of anti-dandruff, which is going to be good for my skin, what has the good chemicals in it, what's reasonably priced, what has a good brand behind it. So if I do that for shampoo, I guess, John, my question is, why do people kind of give up with religion? What do you think makes them give up and think, you know what, maybe, do you think maybe it's the infighting or the wars? Do you think they don't want to offend people? Or do you think maybe they do look into it, but they try to keep it private?
I think you said it, right? It's because it's monist, it's monotheistic. It's basically saying that this is the truth, and therefore things that aren't consistent with this are wrong. And that's true of liberal secularism as well as true of Islam, in that it requires committing to a set of values or a set of beliefs or a set of empirical judgments, and in order to believe that, you have to believe the things that contradict that are wrong. And I think that, as I said before, the way you inherit those beliefs, you come to have those beliefs, isn't based on rationally sitting down and looking through all the evidence and weighing up the alternatives and choosing the right answer. Some people might do that, sure. I'm not saying that's not impossible, but I'm saying in the end it will be determined by your upbringing and the culture you're in.
But I would argue nowadays, especially, seen as we're in a secular liberal country, majority, in terms of the majority of the population, I would argue that more of the people are questioning religion than merely following it. I'll give you an example. Like when I went into school, when we would fast in the month of Ramadan, people would ask, why do you do it? It wasn't a mere fact of, and then people would say, oh, you're doing it, why are you starving yourself? This isn't right. So it's like every aspect of the religion is being falsified, and then going back and checking it, we're like, you know what? It actually goes in accordance to how a person should live. So I would say we're leaning more towards the side of questioning religion as opposed to just believing it. That's why you see a country like the UK that was majority Christian becoming more secular liberal. Why? Because those values are being questioned more. Why? Because those textual sources, like you're telling us to commit to the Bible, why? Who wrote it? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay, where did they get? Were they alive at the time of Jesus? No, they weren't alive at the time of Jesus. Okay, what connects them to Jesus? Do you have a chain of narration? No, we don't have a chain of narration. Then that opens up a question, back and forth. Then a person goes, okay, then what about Islam? What do they say? Oh, Islam claims that they have a chain of narration. How does that work? So if there's a saying by the Prophet Muhammad, we say, peace be upon him, we say that, okay, we heard it from this person, who heard it from that person, who heard it from that person. We know every single person in that chain. Every single person in that chain We know about their name, their family, their tribe. We know how truthful and trustworthy they were. We know about how, competent they were. So that criteria makes that more stronger. Do you see?
Yeah, completely.
So, yeah.
I think those things are very interesting historically. And I think the historical facts around how the Bible emerged, how the Quran emerged, and how it was passed down, and just the kind of the philology behind that, what it shows about language and society and culture where those texts emerge from, is really interesting historically. But like from a theological point, I'm not religious, so I guess I find that interesting as well. But I don't think I'm ever going to be convinced by sort of rational argument to.
So that's actually interesting, because
I'm saying I think it's non-rational.
Interesting. That's fine, because.
Sorry, what I mean there, I'm not saying what you're saying is non-rational. I'm saying my belief in that isn't a rational one. It's a reflection of factors that I have been able to control, like my upbringing, the beliefs of my parents, the beliefs of my community, that I've inherited and absorbed without really thinking about it. And the idea, I think, in the end, you can do as much of the research and the critical thinking as you want. I'm not going to change my views. I don't think someone who thinks the alternative is going to change their views. Like, you can have discourse about it, and that's really helpful. And I find it fascinating, and I'm really interested in what you're talking about. But I think I'm never going to be convinced by rational argument, because I think my belief system hasn't arrived at rationality. It's just something that I've inherited, like my DNA.
That's interesting. However, do you think that there is maybe an argument that maybe you haven't heard, or maybe there is an upbringing that maybe unconsciously, Freudianly, that you have maybe adopted, that maybe can be undone? Like,
people change their mind.
That's what I want to get across to you, John. Never close the door. Maybe in the future, or maybe later on in the conversation, you could hear something. If you've closed the door, what you're in essence saying is that I've heard all the arguments, I found them unconvincing, which is obviously not the case, because maybe there is an argument, maybe there is a way, maybe there is a situation. For example, even though you don't look it, they say people post the age of 25, you do pretty much become set in your ways psychologically. However, there are a few things that can change that. For example, affirmations and trauma. Where death of a loved one, heartbreak, that makes you question existence. Especially, it depends how badly you've been heartbroken. It makes you question a lot of things, like, what's the point? What's the point of it all? What am I doing here? And because you just follow along, and then it's a pain that you're feeling that you've never felt before. And then for some people, they describe it as, I find it hard to breathe. It's like a grey cloud that follows me. So that's that aspect as well. However, the mere fact that you said I was brought up a Christian, but now I've kind of gone away from that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it's more, you're kind of saying agnosticism, that I hold the Christian values, but I can't say for certain what it is.
I mean, I wouldn't say I was brought up Christian. Like, none of my family believe in God. I've never been to church.
Okay.
I'm saying that I think that to live in Britain is to be massively influenced by Christian value system and morality.
Okay.
And I mean, secular is a Christian concept. I think it's impossible to. I would say, like, a militant atheist like Richard Dawkins is as evangelically religious in his atheism as the most passionate puritanical American Bible Belt Christian. I think in the end, Richard Dawkins pretends that he is, basically on reason, and the other side basing it on emotion or kind of superstition or faith. I think Richard Dawkins is as much a man of faith in his atheism as a fervently religious person is in their faith.
I don't think you'll be happy to hear that.
No, but I don't know, he definitely wouldn't be. He would disagree with me. But I think what I'm saying is, like you said it there about trauma and changing your perspective.
I agree with you, by the way.
Yeah, but I completely agree with you, and I think that proves my point. Trauma isn't a rational thing. Trauma is a deeply emotional thing, and I'm saying people's views change and people adopt their values not on rational reason
It's ironic because you've heard of Richard Dawkins. You probably know Christopher Hitchens as well. So Christopher Hitchens' brother Peter Hitchens, he accepted religion, and somebody asked him, "What's the evidence?" Yeah, what evidence? And he kind of echoed your sentiment as well, to a degree. He said it's not necessarily the evidence that I'm going to posit to you because it's subjective. To each their own. To different people, it's different forms of evidence that resonates with them. And you're right, one of those things might actually be emotional. It might be at that particular moment in time, I adopted this particular theology and it gave me a religious experience or whatnot. I would argue, of course, that's not enough. That you do need rationality, a degree of rationality. Yes, there is belief, there is rationality, and you're right, there is emotion as well. However, just let me know what you think about this. One of the argument is called the argument from contingency, yeah, which is quite popular. But let me know what you think about this. So it pretty much states that we're dependent beings. Yeah, everything that you see around you, the microphone, your bike, your phone, it's all dependent. You're dependent on something else. That's dependent on something else. That's dependent on something else. So you cannot have an infinite regress of dependent things. There has to be an end to that chain. So this is a philosophical argument that Leibniz, Aristotle, and all these guys, even Richard Dawkins, to a degree accepts. But he just says, and he posits that the end of that chain, he believes, could be an alien, could be anything else. But as believers, we say the end to that chain, necessarily and logically, it doesn't make sense that it's an alien because the alien itself would be dependent. So the irrationality of dependency would be like, if I'm about to pass you the baton of honor, yeah. So for me to pass it to you, before I pass it to you, I have to ask his permission. Then he has to ask his permission. He has to ask his permission. If it goes on ad infinitum, I wouldn't get to pass it on to you because the chain is still going on. There has to be an end to that chain, and then for them to respond by saying, stop, yes, you can. Yes, you can, yes, you can, yes, you can, and then only then I can pass it on to you, and then you have the bottle. So my argument is the mere fact that we exist, the baton of you, thank you. The mere fact that we exist means that there was an end to that chain. Now the argument or the points are, what's the rationality about the necessary being? Some believe that that being left people, created people and just left it. However, I posit that there needs to be certain logical things that that being needs to have. For example, because it's the first in the chain, has to be independent, has to have will, has to have power, has to have intelligence. And those things I would posit is God. That's the definition of God. So rationally, it makes sense. But John, how would you say emotionally? How would a person emotionally believe in something other than, say, their culture? Let's just say they're brought up like Tarzan or George of the Jungle in the middle of nowhere. Would you argue that that person that's brought up in a jungle in the middle of nowhere on a desert island, would they believe in a higher power?
I don't even think they'd be capable of language, and therefore they wouldn't have a bit of any belief.
But they would, like
if they're in a community, then maybe yes.
He's giving you the baton of honor now.
I mean, yeah, they wouldn't. I mean, it might be that they develop their own kind of explanation for the world, their own kind of belief system, which we might want to call, in a way, a kind of religion. But I think, I'm not saying they would at all think like Christian things.
That's fine.
What I'm saying is, I think that things that we take to be in this country to be universal and thought of by everyone actually turn out to be highly contingent and relative to the culture and the ideas that we've inherited from our ancestors in this country and the kind of historical events that happened to this country that have made it what it is today, which could have been otherwise. I don't think they're at all necessary. I think it's an accident that we believe what we believe.
So a child that's born in a jungle or a forest somewhere, do you believe that that person is just going to, do you believe that they're just going to, do you believe they're going to
answer? Could you answer that, please? Because I'd like to know that.
Do you believe that that person's going to believe in a higher power?
But possibly they could do. They might look at the sun and think, this is giving me light and warmth, and therefore they might have that kind of idea that.
So you believe it's innate?
I think there is. I think whatever you want to call it, there is a human desire to know the answer and to have a system of beliefs. But I think that can manifest itself in religion, or in like your beliefs in politics or your moral system. So I would say an ardent communist is just as religious as an ardent Christian. You know, communists even have their own saints and holy books.
Wow.
Like, you know, the Protestant, the Das Kapital and all sort of the work of Marx and Engels
Special pleading is called.
is looked at in the same way as a Christian would look at the Bible. So I think all cultures have religions, even if they claim to be secular. And what I'm saying is the way you arrive at those belief systems is completely dependent on your upbringing and factors out of your control. So I think the arguments you're giving about, you know, why to believe in Islamic theology, for example, I find really interesting. But I think that for me they're more interesting because it tells us about the culture
where it's rooted from,
of 12th century Saudi Arabia, or you know, it tells you about the society that produced those ideas, and I think that's why I find Christian thoughts interesting as well, because I think it's historically informative about the society that those ideas emerged from. But in terms of the actual engaging with whether it's true or not, I find that less interesting, and I don't think I'm going to change my views, and I don't think anyone will really change their views on the basis of rational argument.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, remember I mentioned this point. I said that if that was the case, then you wouldn't get mass conversions
I'm definitely not saying people don't change their minds, for sure.
And in order to change your mind, you need like a degree of rationality. You need a degree of rationalism, argumentation, evidence to some degree.
I think it's just as likely, if not more likely, that you change your mind, as you say, because of a huge trauma in your life, or because of a profound experience of like the divine, or like some kind of emotional event that has resonance with you. I think that has far more impact on people's worldviews than pouring over the evidence.
I think, you know, when you talk about evidence, it's interesting because some evidence can be regarded as rational evidence. Some evidence could even be regarded as emotional evidence, could even be logical evidence that's actually subjective. Let me give you an example. For example, even if you look around you, you see that a tree once upon a time was a seed. Yeah, you put water on it and you just observe it for a long period of time, and it becomes something as such a grandiose and majestic as this giant tree that we see in front of us. When we see the sun, the way it powers itself, when we see the symmetry of a bird, we'll appreciate, say, a canvas that paints a butterfly. We'll appreciate a canvas that paints a mandarin duck. However, when we see a mandarin duck, we'll say, and if I was to ask you, how did that occur, according to you? So how would you say, let's just say, even if you do say, okay, that's emotional, that's cultural, evident, how would you, what answer would you give to the complexity and the design that we see around us, or even to your existence? How do you think it came about?
I think that's where we're going into a different kind of, a different field. Like there we're really talking about, to be honest, things I don't find that interesting, like basically scientific questions.
But is it science though?
I mean, look, I'm not really a scientist. I've not ever done much education beyond GCSE level in the science. I've never found that interesting. I think like I've got no reason to deny like the classic scientific theories like Darwinism that explain evolution quite well, I think, or the existence of the natural world. And like I think I find those arguments convincing. I can completely see how somebody who was brought up in a different environment and had different ideas given to them when they were forming their view of the world would think differently. And I would not. And I think it almost gets to the stage where saying that one is right and one is wrong becomes a bit pointless. Like, okay, one really interesting example. So I'm sort of interested in history.
We'll come back to this point because it's a good point.
Yeah, we'll come back to it. But like, I think the historical event that I'm really interested in is when Napoleon and the French army invaded Egypt in like the early 19th century, or late 18th, early 19th century, and he basically had probably for the first time like Enlightenment, liberal secularism interacting with Islam. Probably the first time in history that's happened. Like you obviously had Christianity and Islam interacting, throughout the Middle Ages, but the French Revolution, bringing in secular ideas and secular practices into politics, government, culture, the economy. I think the reason that's interesting is because there are, even though they believe different things, there are huge similarities in the types of beliefs that the liberal secular French had versus the Islamic mullahs in Egypt, and that is that they believe in a single truth, and they believe that anything that is inconsistent with that is wrong. So it's two like monistic ideas or monistic worldviews coming into interaction with each other and basically clashing because one they can't both be true. And I think if you look at particularly modern day France with this kind of secular constitution and republican concepts around how society should be modelled, which is very anti-religion, and that's partly because of them rejecting their Catholic inheritance, but I think that is the principal system there. And then you've got Islam, which thinks completely differently, but how do these two belief systems interact in the same society? It's a really tough one, because in the end, they both are trying to convert the other person. I'm not saying they're actively trying to convert them, but I'm saying like in the end they think the other person's wrong.
I agree with you.
And I think in the abstract, like there's no point trying to work out which one's right and which one's wrong, because they're completely dependent on the unique, contingent social circumstances that emerge in both those societies over history, which have produced the belief system and the ideas and the cultural practices that those two communities have today.
That's actually a good point, and that's an argument, ironically, which I make as well, because I say what you're doing is you're measuring both of them using different yardsticks.
Yeah, exactly.
So we'll use the yardstick, of course, belief in God, whilst you will do it, i.e. the secular liberal would do it using their yardstick, which is subjectivism and what their founding fathers like John Locke and those individuals, what they put forward. So I agree with you there. But what then, in order to kind of make the conversation, it's yours. To make it, what's interesting then is that one can analyze the consistencies of what we're asking the other person. So the discussions can become more fruitful and more academic, as opposed to you're right, you're wrong. It can come to that. However, you say that, okay, so if you're asking for beliefs when it comes to God and certain, we say, presuppositions or axioms, then why is it that as secular liberals, where's your grounding of objective morality? Like, where do you get it from? What's the evidence of your morality?
Well, this is my theory that we started talking about. I think that secular liberals, without realising it, have Christian values.
They do, because John Locke, I mean, he did, he exactly. And then suddenly, like Henry VIII did, you separate church from state, and then you have this thing that was once attached to state. I agree with you, in fact. So that's why I think the argument, or when a person is discussing, it's more on the person to talk about, okay, so this belief system has a God, that one doesn't. So then it is God. Then the discussion needs to be centered around God. Is there evidence pertaining? That's why so many philosophical questions and all that is pertaining God. But it's so interesting that when we said, look, how do we kind of conclude how we're here and design and intelligence and all that? You said it's interesting how you went to science. And let me know what you think about this. So science explains the how, religion explains the why. For example, if we see a cake, if a cake is baked and it's in my kitchen, I bring a scientist along and I say, using science, tell me why is that cake there? Then he will start doing experiments, putting it, in a beaker and looking at the chemical composition and saying it's an exothermic reaction, blah, 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 blah. I say, fantastic, brilliant, thanks. But why? Why is it?
I agree.
Yeah, why is it baked? So that's why even Einstein said, can't answer moral questions or questions about whyness.
I think anyone who thinks, and I think this is quite a common view, anyone who thinks that the best and only explanation for everything is the scientific one is not particularly, hasn't really thought about it. I think that's an easy thing to fall back on. People think, science has in many ways replaced religion as the kind of main article of faith that people have in this country. To the extent, I'd say, actually, where you saw during the pandemic, I would say that epidemiologists and scientists had the status of priests back in the 15th century.
Wow.
An enormous amount of power because they're seen to be able to access this higher form of knowledge that the layperson can't. And I think that power was to some extent used during the lockdown. In the same way that priests abused their power in the 15th century, because they had that position in society where they were trusted, because the belief system that people had that explains everything was back then Christian theology. Now it's science, whatever that is. So I think that goes back to my point, though, that it's all religious, really. Even though they don't believe in God, this is agreeing to your point. They still have this need to explain why, and this need to have a set of beliefs that are grounded in some sort of value judgment about why they believe in that. And I think for the liberal rationalist, when they say, I believe in reason and I believe in the evidence, they're saying that in a way that is as religiously loaded as a Christian saying, I believe it because God is, because I trust God, or because I have those beliefs because I believe in divine revelation. I think they're the same argument, just expressed differently.
What's also interesting is, when it comes to evolution and Big Bang, these are mechanisms, or even forces like gravity. These are all mechanisms which are prescriptive and descriptive. They describe, force describe motion, the bend in time and space, whatever you want to call it. I don't want to get too technical. However, no one ever says gravity created this, or evolution created this, or Big Bang created this. It explains change over time, but it doesn't evidence or prove how that thing got started to begin with. And that's why, just to end the point, Big Bang, evolution, forces, their mechanisms, and we believe God is a creator of mechanisms. So there becomes a category mistake when a person says that, evolution disproves God, Big Bang disproves God, because evolution, Georges Lemaitre, when they say that he laid the foundations for Big Bang, he was a Roman Catholic priest. Evolution, Charles Darwin, he didn't come up with God and then say, you know what, he came up with the theory of evolution, but he didn't discard God, saying, I'm a disbeliever now. In fact, one of his friends, Asa Gray, he was a Christian. He didn't abandon his faith. He said, you know what, it's just a mechanism. And even with forces like gravity, when Newton came up with the force, he didn't say, he didn't come up with the force, but he theorized the force of gravity. He didn't say, I don't need God anymore.
He was deeply religious.
Yeah, Newton stayed religious, Georges Lemaitre stayed religious, Charles Darwin practically the furthest he went was agnosticism.
I agree. I think it's nonsense to say that science and religion are incompatible, because I think they're talking about different things, as you say. I think a lot of it is about language as well, the way we talk about things. So take a non-religious example of the scientific and a non-scientific explanation. Take a piece of music. The scientific explanation for why that is pleasurable to hear a piece of music is to say these certain sound waves are interacting with my nervous system to create a pleasure hormone. That is an explanation, and that probably does capture what's going on a scientific level, but you're not really saying anything about the music. Just as good an explanation is it's a beautiful piece of music that soars on a melody line and then comes down in a mournful manner. That explanation isn't scientific, but it's still talking about the music. It's giving a description that is, I'd say, more valuable. And I think you can make the same analogy to talking about what you're saying about science and religion. And I definitely think that the two of them are interacting on different levels and not talking about the same thing.
There's a quote attributed to Einstein. I don't know how authentic it is, but he says something along the lines of religion without science is blind, and science without religion is lame. So kind of,
I agree with that.
The both need to kind of go together. And we're seeing deeply religious figures of the past, like even Islamic kind of theologians and scientists like Khawarizmi, Kindi, Ibn al-Haytham. So all these individuals, they still stayed true to their faith. And even like when Europe was going through the Dark Ages, we were going through the Golden Ages of science and discovery and the like. So And what's interesting about what you've said as well is that when you distill everything down to just materialism, you actually restrict science. For example, even within like Rupert Sheldrake, studied at Cambridge and Harvard, he said that you can't question things in science like telepathy, you can't question things like evolution, and these sorts of things, that there is a general acceptance to such a degree that even like a Chinese biologist said, in our country, you can't criticize the state, but you can criticize Darwin. But in your country, you can criticize the state, but you can't criticize Darwin.
Funny thought, yeah.
Which is literally, it actually falls in line directly with what you've said, which is, it has become like a religion of sorts.
Yeah, clearly.
Yeah.
I think that goes back, I think my overarching point is that I think all people have a religious faith, which is non-rational and arrived at because of cultural factors, and that's as true as that's as true of secular people who don't believe in God as it is of people who believe in God. And like going back to what my perspective is, like I'm not that interested in whether God exists or not. I'm also not that interested in the sort of scientific explanation around how things emerge. Like, I'm never that interested in science. It seems to be very good at working out things, but I find it much more interesting to understand why these communities come up with these ideas and to develop these belief systems, and what does it say about the nature of those communities, and what does it say about the differences and the similarities between humanity over time and in different places.
So the sociological...
I guess sociological, yeah. But I think it's also historical. Like it's a question of, take the question of Christianity's influence. Like that is a really important historical question because it helps us explain why things have happened in the West. Yeah. And tracing a line of consistency from like the ancient Greeks to the early Christians up to the Western world and its Christianity, moving into secularism. Like there's a clear, consistent thread there of ideas.
That's right.
Plato is very influential on Christian theology, and well, all Abrahamic theology. Actually. And I find that interesting because I think it shows us how ideas have a causal impact on the world and influence the progression of material factors in society. And I think if you're interested in why we think what we think today and how this world we're in now has emerged, then I think that those are the most fruitful answers, and that's why I find that interesting. I find it more interesting than the question about, I suppose, the actual theological questions over whether or not the literal claims of the Quran or the Torah are true.
I'll tell you why that is important, even in terms of a historical aspect. Because when you're talking about a group of people that are influenced by certain ideas, and then that group of people, or those groups of people, they say that, you know what, we believe in a book, it's unchanged, it comes from God. Naturally, a person becomes intrigued, like, what are those ideas that are in that book? Why is that book preserved? Why is so much effort and energy being expelled in following it to a T, and why not something else? That, I think, marries and ties in with your point as well. But going back to the previous point, which I found interesting, was then how do you, again, this is a personal thing, not asking for evidence, but how do you believe and how do you explain how, we see all this intelligence and design and the universe and the cosmos around us? How do you rationalize it?
I think lots of explanations. Like one, which could be plausible off the top of my head, is that we're pattern-seeking beings who are designed to spot consistencies and theorise about why they're there, and therefore we do spot consistencies and patterns and design.
And then we build on it. Very good point. Well done.
But I mean, I'm not that one faced. I'm sure there are more explanations. I think another one could be that we have an emotional desire to find out answers. We're naturally curious. I'm sure that, and there could be evolutionary reasons for this. It could just be chance. It could just be random accidents in our brain that make us think like that. But that in itself causes us to find answers to things. And I suppose religion is one of the most important aspects of that finding answers to things. And that's why all societies have a form of religion, even secular societies. I'm basically saying that I think non-religious is not a category.
Would I be accurate in saying that when I said design, am I accurate in saying that you're saying that that's chance. What we're seeing is chance because of, chance?
Yeah.
Okay, so the only thing with chance is, chance again is like a force, isn't it? It's descriptive and prescriptive. It's not creative. Like chance doesn't form things. It doesn't make things. It's like me saying, the rolling of a dice, the probability theory. Probability theory doesn't cause the dice to roll, do you see? It needs a person that's rolling the dice to do it. Yes, forces of motion will explain, and okay, it's most likely gonna land on one because his force was here or there. However, it doesn't claim to answer how it happened in the first place. Do you see?
I do. But at the same time, I think you could probably come up with a...
That's why I'm interested, because these sorts of things, it's interesting for me as well, because personally, I don't think there is, but if you give me one, it will be very interesting for me. I'll be like, okay, that's interesting. Like, how could that be plausible? Because even the patterns thing, like that individual said, we see patterns in things. However, I think there's a difference between patterns and necessities. I'll give you an example. Us being on Earth, we need a certain level of oxygen. We need a certain level of heat and cold. We need a certain level of sustenance. To such a degree, if nuclear war was to happen and the sun gets blotted out, as has happened in the past, according to as scientists have inferred, then when the sun gets covered with a layer of ash or something, we get plunged into an ice age, and then crops die, and as a result, people die. Yeah? There's a reason why we're so intent on going to Mars, because we're worried that nuclear war, no one's going to say that, as human beings, we'll adapt or we'll survive, we'll find patterns or things will work out. Things are so specifically designed for us, John, that if the distance between the Earth and the Sun has to be within 2%. If it moves away, we freeze. If it's too close, we burn. Even the carbon atom, the carbon element, how the three heliums come together, it has to be within 1% of the nuclear ground state energy, otherwise they don't form. It's such that even Fred Hoyle said, and I'm getting a bit technical, but what I'm trying to say is that, when you compound these probabilities, a person's like, that's by chance. It's like those sorts of probabilities we wouldn't accept in our daily life. Like if I saw a cup of tea in my living room, I would never assume that over weeks, if I was on holiday, it came, the saucer came, the teacup came, then water was boiled, and then the tea bag found its way there, and then the milk and everything. I would, to the inference for the best explanation, I would say, logically, an individual came, they made the cup of tea, and now they've gone. Who on earth dared to come to my house, make a cup of tea, and then leave it? Yeah, and then I'll start searching for the person. I wouldn't sit content and go, probably by chance. So I guess there's another thing that I'm adding to the equation, which is why is the bar so high for evidence when it comes to, say, a creator? Well, we would say that, there's chance upon chance upon chance upon chance that we as human beings, if our oxygen is too high, it's too much for us, too low is too less for us, we can die. Sugar too much, too less, we die. Salt too much, too less, we die. Water too less, too much, we die. Where it's so fine-tuned, so specific, it cries for a design.
But I think like
designer, sorry.
I think lots of things happen by chance that when you look back at it, you think, God, if the slightest thing a bit different, that would just happen. To take a human example, meeting your wife, say, it requires you to have been born in that era, in that country. If I'm born 1,000 years before, then I'm not going to meet that person. So suddenly that's like a 1 in a million chance of you being born there. Then I need to live through my life where I meet them. Had I been ill that day, that morning, I might not have met them. Had I decided to do a different job, and then, but you look back at all the chances that caused that interaction to happen, and you think, bloody hell, that was like preordained. The reality is, things could have happened a different way. In the same way that I mean, now I'm getting a bit too scientific. I don't really want to, but in the countless trillions of star systems around the world, around the universe, it just so happens that our one, that was the right circumstances for life. And I think, you know, the reason it has to happen elsewhere is because it's much more likely that you don't have life than you do, and that's why. So, do you know what I'm saying?
I do. But I think what you're doing is you're devaluing, maybe not deliberately, about how amazing creation actually is, to such a degree that if you look, you know, like you've seen a snail. Yeah. Now a snail is just minds its own business. Like a couple of months ago, I discovered that there's a snail with an iron shell. Have you heard about this? And it lives near volcanoes. That's why it's able to survive there. Fish at the bottom of the sea, they actually have light bulbs dangling off their head just so they can see. So when it comes to, you know, even human beings, like I didn't know this when I was young, but even when somebody said that, you know, when you break a bone, the cast, they're not really doing anything. They just put it in place. They put the cast on top. The bone heals itself. So what I'm saying is, it all sounds too convenient. That when we look out, we can't even find a one-legged, you know, one-eyed, you know, wonky bacteria lodged under a rock somewhere, you know, in the ring of Saturn. Believe me, we've looked with the James Webb telescope. We're looking, you know, as, you know, fervently as we can, and with eagerness, but yet not even something pathetic, not even something that you could argue was seeded by human beings. It goes to show that not only is it something by chance, it's, as Hugh Ross says, 1 in 10 to the power of 30. That's the chance. That's awfully specific, that even mathematically you say that it's pretty much zero. You know what I mean? So for us to say, you know what, and that's, I guess, what I'm saying, that even in the universe, why not in the universe over billions of years, you know, there's so many conditions that have been maybe better than us. Why is there no conscious, you know, dreaming, purpose chasing, a moral being that is questioning the existent like us? And I know you're going to be thinking that's a bit of a stretch, but I guess what I'm trying to say is the inference to the best explanation. When you look at the options, when you say chance, you say, look, we don't say that with anything else. For example, if you heard there was an explosion somewhere, yeah, you wouldn't say, yay. You would say, oh no, something's gone wrong, mate. Something's exploded. With the Big Bang, yay. You know, with the Big Bang, something exploded, galaxies formed, stars formed that power themselves, then round planets formed, with water, with air, with organisms, with organ systems, with organs, with organelles, with cells, with organelles, with atoms, and those atoms had protons and neutrons and electrons. It seems a bit too convenient for us to say, you know what, it's a chance. It's a really good chance, mate. Yeah. Okay. Name me one other thing that we would do that for. We wouldn't do that. Like, if you see your child coming down in the kitchen, there's a couple of steps. You see him coming down with a cookie in his hand. You've seen him with a cookie. You've inferred he's come up the steps. He's gone into the cookie jar, taken a cookie, and come down. But imagine if he says to you, Dad, it happened by chance. Loads of hours formed it, and it happened to fall in my hand. You say, shut it, you little twat.
No, I hear you.
You know what I mean?
I get you. But I suppose at the same time, if you ran that probability 0 times 10 to the power of 30, if you ran that an infinite number of times, you would eventually hit it.
The cookie thing?
No, you said previously that the chance of life is estimated to be
1 into the 10 to the power of 30.
1 in 10 to the power of 30, which is obviously almost next to zero. But if you ran that an infinite number of times,
Yeah.
you would eventually hit it. And that's basically how I think, like where we are here. Like it wasn't just one roll of the dice; it's an infinite number of rolls of the dice because the universe is infinite. And
Is it though?
well, I
The
think
Big Bang Theory is established enough.
Yeah.
With cosmic background radiation, with redshift, it's the prevalent theory that we have now, that the universe was once, a point from which it spread out.
Yeah.
Do you see? So we can't give it that infinite. That was at the time of, even Stephen Hawking tried to hold on to the steady state theory. That was at the time of Einstein where they accepted this. Now we're pretty much, it's generally accepted by science that we do have the Big Bang. So we're dealing with maybe 13 billion years.
I agree.
Do you see?
I completely agree. I think in the end, like, you could be right. I could be right. Like, who knows? I think, as you say, like, this is almost non-empirical in the end, and we're never going to prove it.
But do you see how fantastic the conversation is, though?
Oh, completely. But I'm saying on that point you're making there about the question of whether there's a creator or not.
Yeah.
I think. I find it very interesting, but I don't think we will agree on that.
We don't have to.
No,
Yeah.
completely. But I think what I'm saying is, I think my wider point that I find more interesting is that I don't think that our respective beliefs. I certainly don't think that my belief has been arrived at rationally.
Yeah.
My belief's been arrived at because, as I say, the beliefs and values that I've unconsciously inherited from my community and my family, and I think the role of reason is massively overestimated in determining what you believe or what one believes.
I actually agree with you to some degree. I think definitely in some countries, I mean, some authoritarian countries, again, I don't know those countries well enough. I go by the limited understanding that I have from what we're told from our academia and the media. But I mean, authoritarian countries like, say, North Korea, or even Stalin's communist Russia, they didn't have permission to think about certain things. But again, human intuition always, I would argue, reigns strong. And that's why, when the discussion was that why would a child put in a forest somewhere believe in God, there's actually an exhaustive study done by Justin Barrett. He looked into this of the University of Oxford, and he concluded, he went to certain countries, he had big samples, and he concluded that humans are predisposed to believing in a God.
I think that's partly what I'm saying,
Yeah. So I guess even when it comes to kind of religion and God, definitely as human beings, when certain criteria and perspectives get put forward, we definitely have the capacity to change our mind based upon where we are, what knowledge we've been given. For example, certain villages that aren't educated. For example, even in Russia, Stalin's Russia, they had a theory called Lysenkoism, where it was a very regressive belief of genes and how genes work. They didn't believe in nuclear fusion. That actually held them back. So I agree.
I agree. People can be wrong, and I agree. People change their mind. Most of the time. I think in the end, like, my overarching point is, I think people use reason to justify what they've already believed, rather than to decide what to believe.
But let me give you one other thing, though. Like when it comes to science, you've got inductive reasoning, i.e., you look at the samples that's in front of you, and then you make a conclusion. Inference. You make an inference inductively. There's another tool that we have, which is called deductive reasoning. Which is you're going from the many to the few.
Deductive reasoning is just rules-based reasoning.
Exactly. So you've got that form of reasoning where you can analyze the premises and then see if the conclusion is sound or not. One such, I'll posit, I don't think you have an issue with this, to be honest. It's anything that begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist. The universe had a cause.
I think that's reasonable.
So like that, even when, I actually agree with you in the sense that certain even scientific research and certain so-called logical principles can be skewed based upon who's funding them, where they come from. I think that's like an ideological grounding of what you said, which is that even if like you've got certain scientists today. You don't have to give your opinion because obviously there are cameras or whatnot, but some people will say there's no such thing as a man or a woman. So when it comes to that, that goes against well-established science, sociology, whatever you want to call it. However, you have scientists that are actively working against this at the highest echelons. So even science can be hijacked.
Completely agree.
And I agree with you that even rationality to some degree. However, when you do come to logic in its pure form, I think that is a much stringent criteria to kind of sieve out the chaff.
I agree.
So I guess the reason is, what I want to say was because you were very kind of fervently saying that, you know what, I wouldn't believe even if evidence was brought because evidence is skewed. So it's nice to kind of see your transition into saying, you know what, yeah, I agree that there is different forms of evidence.
Yeah, I agree.
I agree how, and the society that I could be in, or the people that I could be, like, who knows, in the future you might be around people that, might be of a certain theology. You might be comparing and saying, you know what, this is more sound.
I agree.
And that's why I thought I would give you a few arguments. I would give you a few aspects that even when you're cycling, you're like, you know what, this was actually interesting what he said. Let me put it to the test. And I'm here at Speaker's Corner. You're more than welcome to say, you know what you said last week was interesting, but I've got an answer to that. How would you respond to that? And I'm here, and thanks for giving me your time.
Really
and
interesting.
Yeah,
What's your
thank
name?
you. My name is Zishan.
Zishan. Good to see you.
John, nice to see you too.
Enjoyed that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, I better go and get on my bike ride.
Take care, John.
Thanks.